So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to a decidedly rainy day on the island of Tal Falas. And today we are going to be seeing evil besiege the forces of good as they set up a defensive position in the settlements on Tal Falas. So a good old-fashioned naval strike here from the forces of darkness. Let's see what is going to be happening. Well, we'll have a little discussion about Tal Falas first of all. I mean, it's a map we've seen before, so I won't go into too much depth, but we have two settlements. We have one that's slightly more open on this side, one that's a little bit more enclosed on this side, a little bit more defensible with the choke points and the high ground over here. However, there are multiple ways you can approach it as an attacker and a defender, actually. So the attackers, of course, it's on them to move forward first and foremost to sort of dictate the early phases of the game. But then, of course, things can change pretty dramatically because how they move will then determine how the defenders are able to move. Perhaps the defenders will fall back all their armies across the bridges to the hills here, which we have seen a couple of times before, to just defend this side, or maybe they'll split up, which is dangerous because they could be destroyed one by one. But then again, they may not. And in fact, the attackers have decided to set up in a way that I haven't seen before on this map, actually. Well, not in a 4v3, at any rate. So we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, I think, starting off with Sumer, who's going to be playing as Rhun. So Rhun, of course, good all-rounder, as well as the good amount of AP they have at their disposal is generally a good thing against factions which really dig in on the defence, because heavily armoured units are obviously going to be tough to break down without a good amount of AP in your army. Eastron Clansmen without the armour upgrade, a decent unit, honestly. I mean, they're very cheap for what they offer as well. Like, without the armour upgrades, they are maybe a little bit more average and a little bit more in line with what other sort of militia swordsman units are like. But having said that, Rhun, it does free up a little bit of money for them to use on their mid and high tier units. And in a siege, of course, you will often have to make a few sacrifices when it comes to what you can field. Dragon's Breath, which is one of the artillery pieces which has an artillery crew, which is actually very impressive. So they are really very strong in melee, which does set them apart a little bit. The Dragon's Breath itself is not as strong as it used to be, so it's no great surprise to see the fact that it's now not brought in every single Rune game that there is. It's still useful, but it's not quite as all-conquering as it used to be, which is definitely a good thing. But it definitely has its place, especially in a siege like this, where if the defenders do fall back too readily and bottle themselves up, it's exactly the sort of thing which can still do a lot of damage. We have some Eastron Warriors, a unit which I'm self-confessed not a massive fan of, especially without the armour upgrades. But I mean, in melee, the one thing I will say is in melee they are slightly stronger than the Eastron Clansmen. But in a situation like this, the Eastron Clansmen, because of their shields and generally speaking the ability to upgrade their armour further, are going to be better at soaking up arrow fire, which when you're on the attack in a siege is going to be something you're generally going to want. Quite a few of them, though. They are cheaper, on the cheaper side, but not as cheap as the Clansmen, so again, I would question the decision to bring them, but maybe they'll do well in melee, we'll see. A couple of units of Variag Mercenaries, good choice for the attacking force, because it means you can skirmish with the defending archers early on, and obviously you can wear them down a little bit like that, which is a very good tactic to use when you're on the attack. Some Baltroth Tribesmen, Javelins, later on, could prove to be very, very useful if the defenders have no answer to them. They are shielded, but not great at taking arrow fire, as you would expect. The armour upgraded Eastron Clansmen, actually, so putting a lot into the armour upgrades for their crossbowmen. They're still not brilliant at taking arrow fire, but they're much better than they are without the armour upgrades, which is, of course, the main weakness of the Eastron crossbowmen. They're very glass cannony in the way that they are normally seen. Eastron Guard, so a lot of the runic units, which I don't actually rate all that highly, are going to be seen today. Eastron Guard, much like the Eastron Warriors in front of them, are decent in melee. The main thing that they bring to the table, which makes them a little bit more useful in my opinion, is their ability to zone out enemy cavalry, but in a siege situation that's less likely to crop up. Then we have some Flagrim, obviously some nice armour-piercing line infantry, pretty much an ever-present for most runic armies. There's only a few matchups where then maybe you don't want to bring them, against factions like Linden, maybe Harad as well. You might want to give the Flagrim a miss. But in most matchups, the armour piercing and the overall stats are going to be something you're going to want. Some Scion Rim, really tough unit of heavy spears, good for keeping things together, good for keeping the attack going for a long period of time. And finally, the General's Bodyguard unit, the Carmel's Chosen. So no cavalry for Rhun today, which would be the other place where they could put their general. But the Carmel's Chosen are a very functional unit of bodyguard infantry. Maybe not the best in class, but they get the job done. Then, here in the middle, we have Jev, who's going to be playing as Angmar. So he's got some Barrow Wights mixed in with his Witch Realm Pikemen at the front. That's a solid front line. I mean, perhaps a little bit vulnerable to range fire because the Barrow Wights, while they can soak up a lot of damage, they're very slow moving. And the Pikes, of course, even with the armour upgrade, they still lack a shield, so decent archers are still going to be able to shred through them with good effect. A couple of units of Blackwatch Legion, however, actually no, just the one unit of Blackwatch Legion. That there is a unit which certainly is not vulnerable to arrow fire, heavy armour, and also a huge shield value as well. Pushing through the enemy lines, obviously going to be a potential danger for anyone facing the Blackwatch Legion, but also they look more impressive than they actually are in melee. In melee, if you get them into a fair fight, generally speaking, they're not all that impressive. Scourge Raiders, obviously axe throwers, and then they're decent in melee as well. Vulnerable to arrow fire though as well. The Witchers, once again, devastating potentially, but vulnerable to arrow fire. The Guardians of Cardolan are not, however. Even without the armour upgrade, they still have a really nice shield value and good armour, so they're going to be able to soak up quite a lot of range damage on the approach. But that would be my main concern about this Angmar army so far. We've got some Guardians of Cardolan, some Marauders back here as well, the cheap line infantry unit that Angmar have access to. And then further back we have, of course, the Witch-Realm Inquisitors, which is good to have a unit like this to try and block enemy sally outs or sally forths with their cavalry, any potential cavalry they may have. The Inquisitors are going to be one of the best tools to try and deal with that. Barrow Wights are obviously hidden, the Snaga Stalkers in there, there might be some Snaga Archers and Goblin Archers as well. My main concern about this might be the fact there's a lot of targets for enemy archers to focus down quite efficiently. It's all about how Angmar deploys these units. If he swamps forth all at once, then it could be a little bit dodgy. But we have the player who sent me the replay. The Emperor himself is going to be playing as Rhudaur. He has got a couple of units of Rhudaur clans with the armour upgrade. Good choice in this situation. Nice shields. The armour upgrade makes them a bit more resilient. And for spears, honestly, they do more damage than you would expect, even with the spear malice. In melee against better units, obviously, they will still be found out, but still, decent unit for this situation. Witch-Realm Enslavers, obviously really, really good AP damage. Again, in a situation like this, generally speaking, you're going to see them. Rhudaur are going to have the money to bring some of their better units because stuff like the Rhudaur Swordsmen are not overly expensive, but they will get the job done. A lot of them for the enemy to try and chew their way through. I think that's 5, or is that even 6 units of them? Yeah, it is. It's 6 units of Rhudaur Swordsmen, so a lot of basic Rhudaur infantry. They're definitely not lacking for numbers over here. And obviously with their shields, they'll be a bit better at dealing with arrow fire, even if their armour is not great. Rhudaur Marksmen and Dunman Hunters. So Rhudaur, when it comes to trying to skirmish with the enemy, they have to go for the cheap but numerous approach. They don't really have the heavily armoured archers, which a lot of the other Western Kingdoms of men have, because Rhudaur are a Western Kingdom, even if they are an evil men faction. You know, a little bit more savage in their approach, perhaps, than their neighbours. Finalizing Berserkers, a very nice unit to have as well. Obviously they have a couple of volleys of their axe throwers and then they charge into melee, where they fill the same sort of role as the Witch-Realm Enslavers, honestly, albeit to a slightly lesser extent. They're a little bit more multifaceted, at least. Reforged Javelins focus a little bit more on the ranged aspects of that, but once again, they are a strong unit of multiple HP, heavy shock infantry in melee, so Rhudaur are certainly not lacking in that department, even if if AP is not going to be quite as effective. Obviously they're a little bit more limited in what they can do, but Trollshire Axe Throwers are one of the best ways to deal with that if they are facing lightly armoured units, because Axe Throwers are really, really good against them, and the Trollshire Axe Throwers of course can hide, so they can try and defend themselves from arrows in that way, because obviously if archers do zero them in, they are quite vulnerable. Less so are the Etten Troll Hunters with their heavier armour and their shields, but then again they're also a little bit more specialised for taking care of armoured troops with their javelins, and also they have, generally speaking, you're going to want to be a little bit more careful with their ammunition. And then the final attacking army is going to be Czech Norris, who's going to be playing as Mordor. He has got some Orc fodder. Obviously they do cost a little bit of money now, but still not a great amount. Like, generally speaking, it's still a good idea to bring them, to be honest. He's got some Orc Maulers without the armour upgrade, so they don't have the Moran looking black plate. But it doesn't really matter too much in this case, because even with that armour upgrade, they're still really vulnerable to arrows, and you're going to want to save a bit of money for Mordor so you can bring their higher tier stuff, and the Orc Maulers are still a very efficient unit. Generally speaking, these cheap but numerous units of Orc heavy axemen are a useful tool to have on the front line, because while they die in droves, they will get some kills before they fall. Moran on infantry, again, very by the numbers Orc unit. Numerous individually, not a huge amount of quality here, but it pads out the army with numbers which you need as the Orcs, and of course shields and armour better than that of most other units for the same sort of price that Mordor have, so in this situation they should be very useful. 2 units of the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, the same applies to them as with the Blackwatch Legion. The Blackwatch Legion individually are of higher quality, but the Blackguard are more numerous and their cost is lower, They are weaker in melee as a result, of course, but actually I think I prefer the Blackguard as a result of what they have in their favour over the Blackwatch Legion. I think that having more numbers for a unit like this is more useful than having them be individually stronger. So yeah, nice tool for Mordor to have. Orc Javelins, you're always going to see them in a siege because for what they cost, absolutely you're going to want to bring them. Temple Guard, Uruk Captains, Troll Drummers and Olag Kai forming up a quality section of the army over here, including the Nazgul. So this is where all of the higher quality Mordor units are, and some Orc Archers as well, just for a bit of extra skirmish. Much in the same way as Rhudaur, you're not going to want to see your Temple Guard skirmishing early, you're going to want to send in your lower tier units first and foremost to deal with the initial waves. On the defence, we have Doge, who's going to be playing as Dale. Certainly in terms of a skirmish fight, Dale will fancy their chances against Mordor and especially Rhudaur with their higher quality units, but we'll get onto that momentarily. Barding Herd on the front line, the armor piercer will be useful against Mordor's more basic units, less so against Rhudaur's, but they should still be able to hold the line, seeing as Rhudaur have neglected to bring any pikes, which is an interesting omission. They brought a lot of swordsmen, but no pikemen to shore things up. Some dismounted Earls of Dale, again, in terms of quality, a really, really good upper end line infantry unit, similar sort of tier, something like the Númenórean Cohort, Alcarondas Legion, that sort of thing. They don't get quite the same fanfare, I don't think, the dismounted Earls of Dale, but that is the company they keep. So a strong unit, and several of them on the front line here, so they should be pretty good at holding the line. Some unupgraded Bardian Marksmen, but they should still be fairly dominant in most skirmish fights, unless Mordor do send forward the Temple Guard, which I find somewhat unlikely. We have the mighty Dalian Paladins over here as well, big AP values coming from them. Again, going to be more useful against a lot of the Mordor units than they will against the Rhudaur units, because as you notice, Rhudaur looks like 2 whole armies going to be making their way down here, which is a narrow choke, but if they can smash Dale out of the way quickly, maybe it'll be worthwhile. Some Dalian Bowmen up on the side with some Blackshots and some Dalian Royal Guard, so obviously a lot of archers up here on the high ground, which they could use to a pretty good effect, but obviously they need to pick the right targets, especially with their Blackshots. Then over here in the middle, if the game cooperates, we have Joran, who's playing as Dorwinion. Dorwinion, they have pulled back, which is probably for the best, because Dorwinion, if they deployed right in the face of Angmar, that could be a pretty ugly matchup if Dorwinion are not prepared for it. Getting a bit of distance, however, and allowing their skirmishers to do their thing would be pretty effective against Angmar, especially against a build like this, I think. So Elvelyn infantry, we've got some Morroquendi Glade Masses in there, of course, really, really strong unit of infantry that. Elvelyn infantry will be decent at holding the line, but they're going to need some support from the stronger Elven units and the Elvelyn Hammer Guard, the human unit that Dorwinion have that is very potent. Obviously the AP will also be useful against Angmar, and Rhun actually to a lesser extent. Morroquendi Pikes to shore up the line again. Elven Pikemen do tend to be of high quality, and the Morroquendi are no different. A lot of Elvelyn, obviously again marksmen, infantry, spears, the heart and soul of most Dorwinion armies, which is tough, durable. Doesn't necessarily do the damage that you'd want to see, generally speaking, as Dorwinion. It's why the thing with Dorwinion is their roster is relatively limited, but the devil is in the details. If you've got to get the balance between having a lot of human units and elven units right. I mean, a lot of the sort of better players I've noticed will tend to try and go more 50-50, which is risky because it will leave you with a smaller army, generally speaking, because the elven units are more expensive, but it does mean you have more quality across the whole of your line that you're able to make, whereas if you go a lot of humans, a lot of the Elvelyn, generally speaking, your damage output isn't going to be enough for you to outlast your opponents. On this occasion, though, I actually think having a lot of Elvelyn will do them a lot of favours, because having these choke points with the Elven backup, with some good skirmish support, especially from up here on the high ground, actually this is Dalian units, sort of massive Escaroth and a couple of units of pikes, they should be able to shore things up reasonably well, especially if Dale comes to their aid with a few units of archers as well. That's a really, really tanky skirmish line to try and take down. Then the final army on display today, we have MP Bekami, who's going to be playing as Cardolan. So he's got some Minhiriath spears, some Dunedain captains are in there, he's got some Greenwatch garrison footmen, some Minhiriath men-at-arms, so obviously again lots of basic units in addition to the captains. Further back here he's got a Trebuchet, he's got some Hearthguard of Amon Sul. Again, you really, in a situation like this, the morale boost is worth it alone, in addition to them being very tanky as archers and spearmen. Crossbows, of course, mounted and dismounted, so Minhiriath sharpshooters with their maces in melee as well, lots of Greenway garrison footmen also. It's pretty much what you'd expect from Cardolan, I think. There's probably a few hidden units. I would be surprised if Cardolan didn't have Dunedain Rangers, as I would be surprised if Dale didn't bring their Athala Rangers. Like, Rangers are just too strong to not bring in a situation like this. It'd be interesting to see what Cardolan do. I'd probably suggest, based on his position, he's going to try and move to link up with Dorwinion. Maybe he won't, we'll see. I mean, Minotaur, Roman Gatekeepers, there's a lot of Greenway units over here as well. Maybe he'll just send a detachment of his forces up and over here and most of his units will go over there. I mean, we shall see, because without further ado, let's begin. And it is going to be interesting this, because this is, again, Rhudaur's idea here to go this way is perhaps the thing which surprises me most, because this, generally speaking, is probably the most intimidating way to get into the settlement over here. It's a very narrow choke point. There's also the small matter of getting up onto these cliffs, which, thanks to the slope actually, you can put your archers down here and most of their arrows will not hit the dirt in front of them. So it's one of those little details that you can use to your advantage, whereas a situation like this over here, if defenders put their archers here, you can safely march in through, because generally speaking most of the arrows will hit the dirt right in front of them. But here, that's not the case, which means you will be taking most of the damage, and especially against a faction like Dale. I mean, a lot of Dale's archers, to be fair, are a little bit more focused around their defensive capabilities, more so than their attack. But I mean, with stuff like the Dragon Slayers, like, just sheer volume is often how Dale can get the job done at range. No one's going to accuse Dale of being weak at range after all. Some bandits have revealed themselves, so again, cheap javelins. In a siege situation like this, they're always going to be somewhat useful as Cardolan begin to march their way towards the support of their Dorwinion allies. And it'll be interesting to see, actually. I mean, Angmar are moving forwards. If I were Angmar, like, this is a reasonably good idea. Like, as soon as you get into range of the Dorwinion archers, things might get a little bit hairy. You can see over here the Alvalin are staying up on the hill. Some of the Morroquendi bows are heading down, as are the Alvalin marksmen. In fact, these are pretty much entirely archers with a few pikes and some glade masters. I would imagine he's probably going to try and put his archers up onto this piece of high ground over here to really lock things down in terms of crossing the bridges. These bridges are a real nightmare to try and get across, really. Medieval 2 bridges. But I actually think that works to Tal Falas' favour, because it means that this sort of high ground over here, the attackers are more incentivized to try and take this rather than just try and rush across the river. Which actually works out in their favour more often than not. Because if you were to just cross the bridges without taking care of defences over here, you would just be getting shot in the side, and especially where range is concerned, that could be pretty devastating indeed. So, interesting that, again, like, the attackers have decided to go 2 and 2, because not only does that mean that Rhudaur and Mordor are subject to the really narrow choke point over here that Dale, of course, set up, and you can see the bowmen are ready to receive them, but also the slightly wider area of approach over here. I mean, that does narrow into that hilltop position over there, but will Angmar and Rhun be able to keep this assault going all on their own? Because we've seen time and time again on Tal Falas that this part of the map over here really does prove to be really very devastating on the attackers, and they need a lot of numbers to keep the assault going. And generally speaking, I would say that more often than not the attackers are able to do that with a lot of numbers over here and eventually break through. With only 2 armies, however, that becomes a little bit less sure. Especially with this kind of Angmar army, I would suggest. More of their lightly armoured units, the Orc Fellas as well, which, of course, again, are another example of a unit which is very vulnerable to range damage. Again, another example of a heavy Orc Axeman, which is low tier, which is efficient in melee, will get the job done. But only if they're not getting shot, which I doubt the defenders will be so courteous. Here come Rhun. I mean, the one thing they do have in their favour over here is they do have the Dragon's Breath. Those gouts of flame that come forth may very well be the difference here. Cardolan, I mean, how many archers have they got? They've got Greenway Garrison archers. I mean, this is the sort of archer which on the defence you're not going to be worried about if it gets drawn into a skirmish with enemy cheap archers, I think. As long as you can keep the crossbows operational. And the slightly stronger archers like the Morroquendi, which are probably going to be over on this side of things as well. So you can see Dorwinion going to be forming up more of a supporting role here for both Cardolan and Dale, who are going to be more on the front lines. For both of these engagements, I would suggest. 2 units of Dalian bowmen are here, ready to attack as they cross the bridge. Dunman Hunters and Rhudaur clansmen. Interesting to see what Doge decides to prioritise with his archers. Because once again, I would say that Dale, while they do have a good front line, don't get me wrong, Earls of Dale, very strong infantry unit. Barding Herd, very good at holding the line. Like, those are the 2 units you'd be concerned about. They are here in big numbers. But, I mean, Dale in melee, you very rarely see Dale win a fight based on doing their damage in melee. Interesting to see the Bardian marksman moving forward pretty aggressively here. Dale coming forward, and you can see here the Bardian marksman firing immediately. I mean, this is going to be a slight problem for the Dunman Hunters. Like, units like this only generally work well in a skirmish fight over a longer period of time. If they're really savaged this badly early, it could get pretty grim. I mean, also the problem here, the Rhudaur clansmen, I see what the Emperor is trying to do, but if he's going to make this work, he needs the Rhudaur clansmen to be in front of the archers. So then those shields and the upgraded armour come into effect. But yeah, these Dunman Hunters are really taking a beating at the hands of 3 units of archers. The silver lining for Rhudaur, of course, is the fact that 3 units of archers are using their ammunition on units which ultimately are not that important for the attacker's victory or plans. Dale certainly obliging them with some early volleys. I mean, honestly, at this point, if I were Dale, I would just leave it as is. I would even be tempted, because of the fact that reinforcements may be a little bit further away, just to test their line, maybe with a unit of infantry. We send forward the dismounted earls, and we can see that Doge has ceased fire. He's got what he wanted out of this. And they are going to counter skirmish now, the Dunman Hunters, but just they've taken a lot of damage already, like just under 60 of them remaining. And they're a relatively poor quality archer unit anyway. So they're not going to do a lot of damage to the more heavily armoured Dalian archers. I mean, they're opening up with their Bardian marksmen again. It's a shame that Dale actually, I mean, cavalry you would think could be a thing to put some pressure on. I mean, the Rhudaur clansmen are here, so perhaps not. And Dale are unlikely to bring their lancers in a siege. They might be more likely to bring their melee cavalry. This is fairly interesting, actually. Surrendering this hilltop over here where the ruins are is not something I've seen done on Tal Falas, actually. I've seen the defenders try to hold on to this position because it's such a nice defensive position pretty much every time. There's a nice position for archers up there on the hill that you can shoot down into. It's reasonably narrow. You've got the hill advantage as well, so you can put supporting units just in behind very easily. There's even some cover from the ruins. But they're giving it up, and that does mean that you give the attackers some high ground if they so desire. And they can start to rain some hell down upon the defenders that are over here. So an aggressive retreat strategy here from the defenders. We'll see if it pays off. Like I said, bottling yourself up, it allows you to consolidate your strength a lot more, but it leaves you nowhere to go if things start to go wrong, which may very well prove to be the undoing of Cardolan and Dorwinion here as they continue to move backwards in the face of the enemy here. Meanwhile, seems to gain cooperates with me. We'll go back over to the other side. Still just probing one another. Rhudaur here. I mean, if I were Rhudaur, I'd actually be very happy with this situation. The Dunman Hunters are doing their job at this stage. And also, the Rhudaur clansmen, while they will also be taking damage, they're not going to be taking damage to the same extent because of their large shields. The armour upgrade also playing its role. And if Dale wastes too much of their ammunition, that is going to be to their disadvantage. Like I said, like most of their melee units are in the form of Barding Herd and Earls, but that tells me that they've probably overspent on some of them. I feel as though with an army composition like this, the red limit has been entered in places. Now perhaps he's going to close the distance and try and finish them off. I mean, he should be able to be fair. Earls of Dale are going to be far superior to Rhudaur clansmen in melee. And also what's left of the Dunman Hunters are not really going to pose too much of an issue for these high quality Dalian men-at-arms. Yeah, this should be fair. And again, crossing the bridge is going to take some time, so I'm surprised actually he didn't try this sooner. But he's going in now. Bardian marksmen I don't think are out of ammunition. No, they've still got their arrows. But this is going to be a relatively one-sided fight. Like I said, the Rhudaur clansmen more bite to them than most spears of this kind from other factions. But against a unit like this, the spear malice and the fact that they're going up against a unit that has really, really nice armour is going to make life very difficult for them. You can see they're very quickly falling by the wayside. The Dunman Hunters are routing towards the enemy, which is never what you want to see. No chance of them returning to the fold. So you can see a few of the Earls are falling as a result of the slightly better attack scores of the Rhudaur clansmen. Some of them that have managed to seek through the lines are going to be dealt with by the Bardian marksmen, who also are not half bad in melee. Across the bridges now, however, come some reinforcements. So now I think the question would be, are they going to arrive in time? No is the answer. The Rhudaur clansmen are easily going to be fended off. The Orc archers are going to be firing while they're on the bridge. This is actually a fairly forward defence from Dale, which I actually appreciate, to be honest. And it might not actually be the worst idea, because it does mean that these Dalian bowmen, perhaps the Alvelin from Joran over here, can shoot a little bit more freely. All of their ammunition is going to find its mark rather than just most of it. This does, of course, mean they're more open to the enemy doing their thing as well, though. With Czech Norris doing the thing with the Orc archers. Doge being incredibly aggressive here, actually. The Rhudaur clansmen are going to come across these Earls of Dale maybe getting a little bit too big for their boots at this stage. I mean, they should still win this fight with a bit of support, to be fair, the Earls. Like, they are significantly stronger at fighting infantry than the Rhudaur clansmen. With a bit of support from the Bardians, they should be just fine. Meanwhile, over here, Snaga Stalkers in position. Actually, Cardolan changing their mind on things. Yeah, Dunedain Rangers getting up here now. I was surprised that Cardolan was retreating as aggressively as they did. And they're now posting up on the hill, not allowing the attackers to take the high ground. Which again, like I said, good idea. You don't want the attackers to run roughshod over you from on high. Especially not with their artillery. Bardian marksmen firing away. They're still going to be far superior to Orc archers in melee, but at this point their ammunition supply is going to be dwindling. And they're going up against Dunman hunters and Orc archers, so a lot of relatively cheap skirmishers trying to saturate the Dalian lines. But you can see over here, in this melee engagement, balance of forces is evenly matched. I would imagine that's going to change as the battle goes on. I still think the Earls are going to have too much. Like, they were outnumbered 2 to 1 more or less, but the difference in quality in infantry killing power is very significant here. And the Earls really proving themselves as a really strong infantry unit there. They're going to have racked up a decent kill count for themselves here. Another unit of Earls coming forward, potentially going to block them around on infantry. Again, the difference in quality between the Mordor line infantry and the Dalian line infantry in this situation is very notable. And that will only increase if the Barding Herd come forwards, but of course the more that Dale commit to the bridges, the more emboldened the attacks are going to be to send forward more of their own strong units, which will include obviously some of the nastier AP tools that Rhudaur have available to them, which will be a significant issue for the Earls to try and deal with. And of course Mordor could also send forward some more supporting tools like javelins, but yeah, you can see over here the Morannon infantry really being destroyed by the Earls. That's a very dominant performance, but they also caught them kind of stretched, which is helping them out a little bit, whereas the clansmen were a little bit more bunched together, so they're a little bit in a little bit better shape. Bardian marksmen again though, skirmishing well as you would expect. Whether or not this is a good use of their ammunition remains to be seen, but they are strong in melee as well, so as soon as they're out, they're going to be able to hunt down those cheaper skirmishers reasonably easily. Meanwhile, Snaga Stalkers moving forward. In comes some Rhudaur clansmen. Interesting to see how Angmar and Rhun decide to try and deal with things over here. I mean, they've got their artillery in position. Is that a worthwhile target to go after? I mean, it might be. You have to ask yourself, when in the battle is this artillery going to be most useful? The longer you leave it, the more likely you're going to be fighting an uphill battle in one of the final stand locations that the defenders can pick when you force them out of the initial defences. The artillery is not going to be all that useful in those situations, I don't think. Early on here, though, you can make a few holes in the defensive line, put them under pressure, give Cardolan something to think about, maybe bait them into moving further forwards than they would like. Dale, on the other hand, have moved further forwards than we've seen typically in the past, and they've gained a good deal from it. I mean, the Troll Drummers here, this would be a very odd move to send them into the Earls, because, I mean, while Trolls tend to do better against line infantry than shock infantry, Troll Drummers are not really combat trolls, and the Earls should be able to deal with them as well. I mean, the Morannon infantry is just getting absolutely bulldozed here by the superior Dalian quality. Yeah, and you can see here the Bardian marksmen have also moved forward to try and hunt down those Orc skirmishers. Unlike the other two bridges, however, Dale are actually losing this fight because the Orcs were well prepared for that. They shot the Bardian marksmen on the approach by the looks of things, and then the Morannon infantry came in to finish them off. Unlike the Earls, after all, the Bardian marksmen, melee is a secondary concern for them. They're decent at it, but when they're already depleted and when they're facing down that many Orcs, it's going to be a little bit hairy for them. In come the Rhudaur swordsmen. A little bit surprised they actually weren't committed sooner. They will do better in melee than the Rhudaur clansmen. They'll probably die more quickly, but they will at least land some more telling blows. And you can actually see over here now these Earls are probably going to get overwhelmed. Some more archers just in behind them as well. You can see Rhudaur are trying to get as close as possible to the Dalian infantry to make sure that the Dalian archer support is not going to be as effective as it could be. And that's good. That shows some good awareness, I think, from the Rhudaur player, and now he's even squeezing through the lines in some places with his Rhudaur swordsman, and that is the beginning of the end for this aggressive Dalian defence. I think they're still winning over here, but on the other two bridges they're getting forced back, and Dale now are going to have to try and react to this. I mean, if you do this early on as Dale, you kind of need to stick to your guns and keep sending units forward. And I think Dale has probably lost the bottle to do that. It might come down to Dorwinion to do it for him with some Elvalin infantry. Yeah, you can see they're pulling back now. Was this worth it from Dale? I don't know. I'd lean on the side of probably not, because they've used up a lot of their ammunition as well as not really killing off anything too important. So I would say probably not. These Bardian marksmen are going to try and hold them back for just that little bit longer. But it's not going to be for that long, I don't think. Rhudaur clansmen pushing through. The Earls, I mean, you could see how strong the Earls were. I don't think the problem was with how the strength of the units they committed. It was just, in the end, they committed them forwards without the stomach for doing it over a long period of time. If you're going to do this, I would say you need to do it for longer than Doge did here. But I mean, we'll see. We shall see. This unit of Earls are still doing very, very well, and they'll continue to for a small amount of time at least when it comes to combating the fodder, padding their own kill counts very nicely. Meanwhile, we head over here just in time actually to see probably the first wave of the runic units. What's going on there? Greenway Garrison archers are firing right up into the air. You can see how poor the accuracy of militia archers are when they fire right up into the air like that. They're actually getting some of their own men as well, and even those hits they are landing, not going to be all that effective, to be honest with you. You need to be in a better position than that to get some good value. Forward come the green tinted Barrow-wights now. This is the problem. I mean, the Barrow-wights are so difficult to get rid of. I mean, you're definitely not going to do that with the kind of Cardolan front line we see here, made up of Minhiriath spearmen and Greenway Garrison footmen. I mean, it's a nice efficient front line for holding back infantry as you shoot them. But Barrow-wights are one of those things that it is awkward to finish them off. I mean, really the best thing for dealing with them is lancers. But in a situation like this, of course, it's not quite that cut and dry. You can't really use lancers in a siege like this when you've decided on being defensive and sort of focusing on the structure of your lines and that sort of thing. Snaga archers are hidden back there with the Dragon's Breath. The Barrow-wights are sort of lining up in position, so still it's more of an angry staring contest than an actual battle over here so far. Greenway Garrison archers firing, but that was a blank shot, I think. A little bit too close to their own men for comfort there. And forward come the Eastron clansmen now. Are we going to see a charge? Nope. Well, you missed your chance. We're probably going to miss the start of that engagement because they've been messing around too much. Forward come the Orcs. Doing a good job here. The Earls turning around, they're wavering. Done a little bit of damage to the Orc fodder, but obviously now they're surrounded on all sides. Those Rhudaur swordsmen are going to get shot in the back by the Dalian archers up on the hill. But ultimately these Earls are being surrounded and torn to pieces. And so far, I think Rhudaur and Mordor will be fairly pleased with how this has gone. They've managed to soak up a decent amount of the ammunition Dale have, even if Dale have gone very archer heavy as they normally do. Need to start making dents in that ammo supply somehow. Now they can start pressing into the valley itself. Dale are not alone over here though. You can see they've got some units on the front line, but in support quite a lot of the Dorwinion army have come over here as well. A lot of the Elvalin anyway. Some Morroquendi back here as well. So some marksmen up on the hill. Again, they're being baited into a frontal charge here, Dale. Again, I think Doge needs to realise when he's being bamboozled here, because they're obviously just going to kite backwards with their archers here at this point, Rhudaur and Mordor. Taking the bait with a unit, a phalanx unit of all things, is not really what you want to do. This is where Dale shouldn't have to leave their comfort zone. They should be able to counter skirmish very effectively. But unfortunately their Bardian marksmen have already been utilised. I mean, Rhudaur have actually kind of done them a bit of a favour by closing them down in melee, because it makes them a little bit more difficult to hit, to be honest with you. And these units are going to stand little chance against the heavily armoured Bardiche-wielding Barding herd. Dalian bowmen are now counter-skirmishing into the Rhudaur marksmen, which is good. Meanwhile, over here, the engagement has begun. After a good deal of posturing, we are underway. What's going on over there? That looks like, I mean it is, it's patches of dead units, including some of the Dragon's Breath, so I think they must have been going for the artillery. The artillery piece itself, which suggests the use of the trebuchet. Can't see it though. What's going on back here? There is also some dead units back here, which would also suggest the Dragon's Breath took some pot shots as well. although I didn't hear the dull thud that is usually associated with that from across the map. Very Egg mercenaries firing. So again, good support in behind, cheap but effective, well, reasonably cheap but effective skirmishing archers, Greenway Garrison archers trying to do their thing as well. But here on the front line, this is where Cardolan's quality is starting to come into question. Those pikes are going to do a decent job, but they're going to need far more on the front line if they're going to deal with the Barrow Wights. The Barrow Wights are surrounded by an ocean of garbage, really. They've got some Orc Fellas, they've got some Eastron Clansmen, they've got some Snaga Stalkers. None of those units are particularly good. The Orc Fellas are probably the pick of the bunch. But that's all they need. Slowly but surely, this front line will be worn down if Cardolan only commit their lower end units. But of course, if they commit their higher tier units, that in turn will convince Angmar and Rhun to maybe send forward stuff like the crossbows or even the witches. Meanwhile, over here, a bit more like it this from Dale and Dorwinion, some Helvellyn infantry moving forward with a bit of a Dale counter-attack here as they get up into the faces of the Rhudaur swordsmen and the Moranon infantry. The troll drummers doing their thing, angrily banging their drums in the background, keeping those orcs in the fight. I don't believe it actually affects the Rhudaur morale. I think it only affects the morale of the faction that the troll drummers belong to, which means only the Mordor orcs are gaining that morale buff. The orc archers are firing in, but they're firing into Helvellyn infantry. They're going to be reasonably comfortable at dealing with relatively low quality ranged damage like that. Those orc javelins, they've been committed for maybe a little bit early, because that's going to be a target which you can definitely go after. Forward come the Nazgul. Their addition to the front line will complicate things somewhat. But you can see actually over here they are overlapping the line here, the Helvellyn infantry, and that should finish off this initial attack pretty quickly. This will allow them to get charged in the back cover from fodder, from the troll drummers actually, and from the Nazgul. So those Helvellyn, they can hold on long enough. Again, maybe a little bit gung-ho that from Joran. See, I mean, the Barding Herd shoring things up nicely, acting as the anchor, as most Phalanx units do. Earls, Helvellyn, and also some Dalian Bowmen that are out of ammunition are in there as well, doing some damage to those orcs. As the drummers firing, the Orc Javelins are in there. They're in a good position as well, actually, the Orc Javelins. They need to be dealt with, really. And they are being dealt with by the Athala Rangers, so breaking out the big guns to try and deal with that. But they need to do something. In fact, I would say they probably need to get a unit in melee. I would say Joran's Helvellyn infantry are pretty ideally placed to try and deal with them, because the more volleys that find their way into that Dalian front line, the more difficult it's going to be to sustain those sort of casualties. They're going to get some Earls into them now, which is good. Shows that the Dale player recognises the danger that even a relatively low tier unit like the Orc Javelins poses to a front line like this if you let them do their thing. In come the Rhudaur Marksmen, getting very close to the front line, to the point where they're honestly probably going to be forced into melee sooner rather than later, especially with those Dalian Bowmen chasing around the flank. Yeah, the Nazgul are on the front line, but you can see the Helvellyn have been somewhat rescued as a result of their daring counter. There's the Rhudaur Marksmen. You can see also armour-piercing arrows are finding their way in now as well. You know, with... oh no, those are Dalian Royal Guard. Hey, armour-piercing then? That's the projectile that's used for armour-piercing arrows. They never used to be armour-piercing. I think that might be a little bit overkill, considering the Royal Guard and the... that would make the Royal Guard and the Blackshot Dragon Slayers practically the same. Maybe that's just an oversight. Can't imagine they're armour-piercing. That was never really the point of that unit. Well, anyway. So far, Dale actually weathering that storm reasonably well, to be honest with you, considering some challenges. In come the Eastron Warriors. Cardolan's front line is starting to see a few gaps appear in it. I mean, the bandits are firing some volleys in. The crossbows are starting to do their thing as well, but I mean, yeah, the advancing of the Witcher-armed pikemen onto the front line. I mean, Cardolan are still kind of holding, but that's in danger of not lasting all that much longer. When you start to see your front line get compromised and units start to squeeze around the flank, you're in a little bit of trouble. There is the Trebuchet standing tall on top of the hill. The bandits are going to get in the way. In come the Variag mercenaries that are out of ammunition, so the Easterlings finding that gap and going for it. That bandit there just uppercutting one of those Variags. Sharpshooters are in the background as well. I wonder what these crossbows are actually firing at. Because I can't imagine they've got a particularly good angle. Yeah, they don't really. I mean, I can understand the desperation here to try and do a lot of damage quickly, try and break this assault. Because it could work. I mean, a lot of the reinforcements, honestly, from Rhun and Angmar are pretty far away, so if you could break this assault, it could work out very heavily in your favour. But if you're going to do that, you need something a little bit more heavy duty, not the Gwathlo trackers. If that were Dunedain Rangers up there, then perhaps, because you could carve through anything that wasn't a Barrow Wight pretty quickly, and even the Barrow Wights themselves would take a fair amount of damage from that. More Greenway units and more Minhiriath. Still a lot of them that can be committed forward. But reinforcements are on their way. Guardians of Cardolan heading to the front. More Eastron warriors as well. Variag mercenaries with a bit of ammo, a bit of support, as well as the Eastron Guard. There's not a huge amount of range support coming in for this front line at the moment, I must say. And as a result, a lot of these unshielded, more fragile units are actually finding their niche. Keldon River Patrol could change that. Dorwinion cheap javelins. Oof. I mean, that's a good shot. They have now managed to open up a bit of an avenue there. It's a decent place to put the trebuchet, honestly. I mean, I wouldn't use up too much of the trebuchet ammunition here because you could get a really devastating hit, to be honest. But again, you're really hoping for a rout more than anything here. I'm amazed Cardolan's morale has actually held up as well as it has, to be honest with you. Meanwhile, they have forced Dorwinion and Dale back once again. Most of these units look like the same ones, to be honest with you, so it was a willing retreat to get a little bit closer to their support. Athala Rangers are here. Are they using their ammunition wisely? That was a blank fire, so we won't be able to find out from that. Dalian Bowmen fighting. Rhudaur Sorton with their hexagonal shields. Facing off against the Alvalin infantry backed up by Barding Herd. Again, nothing too important committed forward yet, other than perhaps the Nazgul. But I think, are they still on the front line, or are they back here somewhere? I think they were. Yeah, they were retreated. A few of them did die, actually. But still enough of them to pose a problem. Dalian Bowmen wrapping up around the flank. So I mean, both Dale and Dorwinion have shown a willingness to do this. Find a gap around the flank and wrap around, even though it does invite a counter push, or sort of adding more units to the front line, which would counteract that manoeuvre. They have shown a willingness to do that, so they're not content to just sit there and let their front lines be static. They are attempting to move and do the tilt the balance of the fight in their favour. Blackshot Dragon Slayers are back there. They're getting shot actually from the archers. I would actually be more likely to go after the Lake Town Pikemen, I think, because you're really unlikely to kill off Blackshot Dragon Slayers with really depleted Rhudaur marksmen, whereas Lake Town Pikes, you hit them with most kinds of arrows, chances are they're falling. Those very light padded gambesons not going to be enough. Blackguard of Rhudaur trying to bulldoze through. I think maybe the time wasn't quite right for that. I mean, they're going to go a fair ways into this formation, but they're also going to take a lot of damage at the hands of the Barding Herd. And also there's reinforcements on hand. I mean, there's Swordmasters of Escaroth, which don't have the armour upgrade, which is actually quite rare these days to see that. So Swordmasters of Escaroth and a unit of Lake Town Pikes coming in, which should shore things up enough to make this push fail, to be honest with you. 42 Orc Archers are not going to be enough to turn that around. I mean, they've made some progress as a result. Probably left a lot of these Barding Herd surrounded and allowing them to be finished off. But yeah, it's ultimately going to end in failure. And the Blackguard do end up routing as a result. And now there's a unit of Pikes on the front line as well. Low tier Pikes, but it should still be enough to help shore things up here for a little while longer yet. Some mercenary crossmen from Cardolan. Good to see that the defenders are helping one another out, seeing armies across multiple fronts. Meanwhile, more reinforcements on this front line will be needed if they want to keep hold of it anyway. The arrival of the Eastron Guard on the front line and another unit of warriors has left things looking pretty dire for Cardolan, honestly. These bandits are not going to be enough to plug this gap in the front line for all that much longer. A lot of the Eastrons are shaken, to be fair. I have a feeling that's got more to do with the trebuchet, and in fact, you can see over here the trebuchet has done something very useful. The Dragon's Breath lies in ruins. Worthwhile, I would say, because while it's nowhere near as powerful as it once was, Still the sort of thing which can ruin a front line, especially if it took up a position over here and shot down into the valley there. Could have been a real issue for the defenders, but they've nipped that in the bud. Of course, the downside to that is now the crew, which is effectively a bodyguard tier infantry unit, is now free to engage because there's really nothing else for them to do. So now that they're on the front line, it only adds to the front line presence, but still worthwhile. So they have actually made some good gains here, the defenders. More Elvelen heading towards the front line. There's actually some Barding Herd that are routing from the other side of the map over here. Elvelen and Minhiriath holding on. I mean, very functional units, but not necessarily the most exciting Gwathlo trackers up on the hill. Again, they're lightly armoured, they can hide anywhere, but they're not rangers. They don't have access to those projectiles. It looks like they just ran out of ammo as well anyway. But at least it's some support. And Hiriath, sharpshooters are firing. Probably not the best angle. Can't afford to be wasting crossbow bolts of all things if you're Cardolan. It is, by leaps and bounds, your most effective tool. Especially in a situation like this. Meanwhile, Rhudaur swordsmen coming forward in mass. Morquendi Glade Masters coming forward. So Dorwinion, eager to help Dale here. And this is the kind of unit, honestly, that will need some sort of response. I mean, the Nazgul are on the front line, but they're already slightly damaged. There are pikes here. The Morquendi Glade Masters are going to carve their way through Rhudaur swordsmen and Orc maulers, especially with a bit of support. But they are going to need more support, I think. I mean, there's mercenary crossbowmen. The Glade Masters are at their strongest, as most elite infantry units are when they have plentiful support around them. They do still have some Dalians fighting alongside them, but not enough, I don't think. And the Glade Masters are actually in danger of being somewhat overwhelmed here, especially with the arrival of more Blackguard on the front line. So the second unit of Great Shield Infantry is here, and now I think the time is right for a push. Because the nearby supporting infantry unit they're sending in is actually pikemen, which won't help as much as it could. Especially seeing as some maulers are actually getting in the way anyway. So it could be that the Dorwinion decision to commit their Glade Masters there could be a horrendous mistake, and it's proving to be. They're dying very quickly here because they just don't have the support around them. They're being run through. Not really because of the Great Shield units, because the Great Shields mostly miss them, but all the support that was nearby has been taken away. The Morquendi Pikes and the Lake Town Pikemen also are going to get pelted by those Trollshire axe throws. So all of a sudden, the combination play there from Mordor and Rhudaur, this could be ideal. I'm actually a little bit surprised they didn't follow through with their Great Shield units there. Perhaps he wants to save them for another push later on, but it is allowing them to sort of recollect themselves, the defenders. But with those axe throws, with those javelins, they're going to do tons of damage to those pikes. The Glade Masters have already taken a lot of damage, and with more Rhudaur clansmen on their way to the front, actually those Ettenmore's Troll Hunters that are out of ammo, on their way to the front line, solidifying their gains somewhat here. Good play that from the attackers. Drummers are still alive as well, keeping the Orcs in line. Javelins moving forward, more Rhudaur swordsmen. I mean, this is the thing, they had 6 units of Rhudaur swordsmen. That's a lot of Rhudaur swordsmen. There's around 1,000 of them that can be committed freely. Meanwhile, Elvel infantry ready to be committed in. You can see here the bandits and the Minotaur Romen gatekeepers going toe to toe now with the Dragon's Breath, but amazingly enough, you can see here the danger. All of these lower end units, all of these Eastrons, the morale has fallen apart. And now all of a sudden, it really is just the Barrow-wights that are left on the front line. And the Barrow-wights, they need to be combined with something in order to get the most out of them. And that is not good for the attackers. To see an assault fall apart in that way. I mean, they're making some good ground on the other side, I think, with Mordor and Rhudaur. But over here, it's always alarm bells always start ringing when you see an attack almost completely collapse and the reinforcements are way too far away to do anything about it. Orc fellas mobilising. Now it's time for maybe some of the more heavy-duty runic units. And I feel somewhat justified there in my dislike of some of those Eastron units because they were not up to the task of keeping the assault going. They may be cheaper, but they turn tail and run. Flagrim going to move forward. Obviously Blackwatch Legion as well, so certainly tankier units, but at this stage there's probably less in the... well, there's Dunedain Rangers firing. I mean, that is certainly not going to help matters for the attackers on the front line here. Question is, what are they going to fire at? They're going to fire right across the way, which I mean, fair play. difficult to keep track of how much damage archers like this are really doing, but you can always assume that in a situation like that, the Rangers are going to do some good work. Elvalin marksmen are getting a run through now, so yeah, I think over here, while the attackers are maybe struggling a little bit over on the other side, Rhudaur and Mordor are making very good progress. Getting into the settlement now. We've got back here some Dalian Paladins, some Paladinos. Crossbows moving back, so yeah, they're going to have to try and reorganise their defence at this point. I don't know where the Blackshot Dragon Slayers are going. If they go over there on their own, they're just going to get swamped. They're going to pull back, and I would imagine, based on the fact that the hill defence is still going well, they're probably going to set up a defence here to try and stop Mordor and Rhudaur, and they would be right to do that, I think. There's still Elvalin Vineguard over here, so they were guarding the bridges. I think at this point you probably only need one unit of Vineguard to do that, to be honest with you. The other two can turn around and get ready to meet the advance of Rhudaur and Mordor. There goes the Dorwinion General. Some big trolls and some enslavers there, rolling forwards. Meanwhile, Cardolan Patrol out of ammunition now, having dumped most of their supply into the Dragon's Breath, which has given the Gatekeepers the leg up in that fight. So they're going to get into melee, which they're very poor in. And I think with a slightly stronger assault like this, the Blackwatch Legion, they may be going uphill, but they're still going to be able to push a very lightweight unit like the Cardolan Patrol out of the way. And following them up is going to be the Flag Rim with their maces and their axes. So maybe now the attackers can start to make some ground over here as well. After all, let's not forget that the defenders are going to have to make some choices now. They still have units over here, to be fair. They have the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Dalian Paladins are heading over here. So the attackers as well, Mordor and Rhudaur, what do? They continue to punch through over here on the low ground, try and get through the defensive position Dorwinion has set up. Or what I would personally do would be to go up over here, where the Dalian Paladins and Blackshot Dragon Slayers are retreating to, because this, you have all of these units effectively trapped, and most of them are archers, even the ones like the Dragon Slayers and the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, even the Morroquendi Bows, to be fair, are strong in melee. But if you can wipe these guys away, focus on them, again, the ball then is back in your opponent's court. Do they come to rescue those archers, or do they let you finish them off? And I do think the attackers are in a decent position here at this stage in the battle. Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers are being backed up now by Greenway Garrison Footmen, and Elvalin Infantry are also moving forward, but at this stage, more reinforcements have come. Orc Fellas getting on the front line as well. Well, the Barrow-wights are still there, still loitering around. But Rhun continuing to push in, and actually there's not a huge amount of infantry here that's willing to stop Rhun. They're getting there now, but that was a little bit, caught a bit flat-footed there, the defenders perhaps. The Elvalin Vineguard are going to come in to try and stop the advance now, but Elvalin Vineguard, by class of unit, a low-damage, heavily armoured spear unit, are going to be pretty poor against the Flag Rim, especially now that they're fighting uphill. I mean, here we have sharpshooters getting pounced on. Morroquendi Bows trying to use their poison arrows, but yeah, I mean, it was going pretty bad for the attackers over here, but perhaps being broken through on the other side made the defenders take their eye off the ball a little bit, and that is now allowing the attackers to claim advantage. Let's see. Pikes are over there. Defeat almost a certainty. I mean, this could still be a bit of an issue. I mean, that wasn't as devastating as it could have been, but most of those kills were on Barrow-wights, so I'm sure they'll take it. That is a chunk of rotting meat, however. So the Trebuchet may have run its course. It has been firing for a little while now, and Trebuchet doesn't have that much ammunition, to be honest with you, so that's probably that for them. Meanwhile, some Elvalin marksmen still up on that hill over there, but it looks as though Rhudaur and Mordor are going to not do what I would have done and joined our forces to take this hill over here. They are instead going to head right for the Dorwinion defence, which some Dunedain captains over here, Elvalin infantry, Hammerguard. They may have lost the Glade Masters, but they still have the Hammerguard. I mean, the Enslavers are a little bit further ahead of their support, but they're going to charge in to the Elvalin infantry, exactly the kind of infantry unit they like to fight, to be fair. This kind of line infantry, again, low damage, packing on that armour. That's where they get their value from, but not the kind of unit you want facing down the Enslavers. And now the reinforcements have caught up. Trollshaws, Rhun on infantry. Another strong unit to have in the late game is going to be the Adunheim Shadow Bows, because they're actually fairly difficult to skirmish with their armour. Like I said, among all the Rangers, most Rangers have got relatively poor armour. That is not the case at all with the Adunheim Shadow Bows. They've actually got very good armour for their class of unit. There's Elvalin infantry taking a volley there from the Orc Javelins. A lot of them will get back up, but it's going to disrupt their advance fairly significantly, that. They are going to get into melee with them though. Mordor not quick enough on the draw to retreat, so some of them are going to get shanked in the back by the infantry as they continue to move forward. But now the Rhudaur swordsmen are going to get in the way of the advancing Elvelyn. Still the small matter of those Dunedain captains. That unit of Elvelyn infantry is going to fall apart, and I think the defenders, to be fair, they are... I'm seeing a lot of things which lead me to believe panic has set in. Because they were actually reasonably well organised for most of this fight, but as soon as Mordor and Rhudaur really started to make progress, I think their decision making has deteriorated a little bit. And as a result, they really haven't been able to get their ducks in a row since then. And that may be what decides this fight, honestly. Like, the defenders have got less wiggle room for error. It's not a 5v3, so it's not enough for me to say I think the attackers are definitely going to win. They still have some strong units, Dunedain captains, Elvelyn Hammer Guard, the kind of things that, you know, potentially could do very well. There are the rotting meat clouds, which when you have the effects turned down to lowest look almost like a JPEG that just sort of follows the camera around. It's very weird. Carmel's chosen pulling back. Let's see over here. Scion Rim. Mercenaries. I mean, yeah, this is a pretty heavy duty runic assault now. And again, they're having to fight uphill, Dorwinion. They're having to fight uphill into units which they really aren't going to like fighting against. Hammer Guard as well. I mean, they're going to do very well against a lot of these units. The Scion Rim as well will do pretty poorly against the Elvelyn Hammer Guard. But there's just, like, it's a question of numbers here, and the Hammer Guard, are they going to be able to... Well, nothing is going to be able to really carve through the barrow weights quickly other than artillery. Perhaps Angmar will do them a solid and use their own witches on them. They're still a problem, of course. Something that may have to be considered. There's the Dragon's Breath crew. I thought that was the witches then, but no. Kelder and River Patrol, victory seems certain. Are you sure? They're fighting uphill against Witcher-armed Pikemen and Guardians of Cardolan, and you think the River Patrol are going to win that fight? I think not. I mean, there's the Trebuchet. I mean, there is this resistance up here could still be a bit of a saving grace for the defenders, to be honest with you, because they've still got a lot of strength up there. Morroquendi Pike's getting in there, but it's getting more and more grisly here, as now the line is going to be wrapped up by Reforged javelins. Those big war clubs of theirs, two-handed, armor-piercing damage, all the things that those Elvelyn and the Minhiriath are not going to like fighting against. 4 Nazgul's still alive as well. They've really been through the ringer. Orc Maulers blowing through the Elvelyn, just not enough resistance here, really. Adunheim Shadowbows also doing their thing. Elvelyn marksmen firing away as the forces of evil continue to march through. They are going after the right targets, to be fair. They're going after more lightly armoured units like the Rhudaur Swordsmen. Or Javelins. I mean, I think the Adunheim Shadowbows are just too far away. And there are the Black Shots as well, so... What is this unit down here? Very depleted unit of Blackguard. So the Trebuchet, I guess they're out of ammunition, they just moved it slightly in the way, so units, it buys them a little bit more time as units try to navigate around them. Small margins, I suppose. Blackshot Dragonslayers are actually doing a really good job at targeting down the Temple Guard at this point. And this is the downside of not claiming this position earlier, because, I mean, a lot of the units that are up here are archers. Any pot shots they can take, they will do so. And if they can deplete your army enough, I mean, the Hearthguard and the Black Shots alone are going to be reasonably tough to take care of. When you add the Paladins and the Morroquendi Bows, they're up here as well into that mix. I mean, even if it is mostly archers, it's still not great to try and deal with, but you can see over here the Dorwinion front line. Ever since they tried to fight uphill into those units, it was always going to be fairly difficult. The last unit left standing is obviously going to be the Bodyguard unit, the Elvelyn Hammer Guard. Going to try and do what damage they can. Morroquendi Bows using their poison arrows to try and deal with as many of those E-Strong crossbows as they possibly can. Again, a good choice. Goblin Trackers moving forward. But the momentum, well and truly with the attackers as we enter the final phase of this fight, the final 10k frames. As Rhun continue to march downhill. I mean, at this point, like, the defenders are scattered at this point, so the best thing the attackers can do is isolate the 2 pockets of main resistance that remain and go after them one by one. And it does look as though this is going to be the first one to be the victims of that. I mean, the Dunedain captains are on the front line. They will be sufficient to defeat Reforged javelins in melee. Superior stats, generally speaking, a more skillful unit, but they're going to fall back once again. These marksmen won't last too much longer on the front line. I mean, they're going to try and use the sharpshooters, but there's really not much left to lose anymore. You may as well keep a sort of unified front line down here and allow the crossbows to try and do what they can. Temple Guard are over that. I mean, to be fair at this point, Mordor and Rhudaur, they've made a lot of good gains in this fight thus far, but by now they are actually reasonably depleted. You can see over here as well, actually, Cardolan's Dunedain Rangers, out of ammunition, still fighting the good fight. They're going to be able to finish off these small pockets of resistance over here, further deplete what's left from Rhudaur. I wouldn't be using my ammunition on these very depleted units of Rhudaur swordsmen at this point, because the ammunition you have up on those hillsides is quite literally your only hope of victory at this point. Even though the Hearthguard are not the most damaging unit of archers, you need all those arrows for later. Temple Guard firing away, pikemen advancing forwards. There's still the Inquisitors, maybe not the most significant unit in the world at this point. There's still anti-cavalry options in the Morroquendi bows, of course, when they pull out those glaives in melee. It's not a huge anti-cavalry bonus, but it should be enough, to be honest with you, especially in conjunction with something as devastating when it comes to damage as the Dalian Paladins. Now though, Minhiriath sharpshooters being engaged in melee. They're AP actually, with those maces, combined with the Dunedain captains. That's a decent duo, so they should be able to do a little bit more damage to the host of evil, but ultimately their fate has been written, and they will be, this hilltop will be their tomb. Again, like, this to me is kind of pointless from MP Beckamy. Like, he's actually going to do worse by doing this, I think, because he's going to underman his front line. He's also going to allow his Minhiriath sharpshooters to be open targets for the Orc Javelins. Like, I really don't understand the point of prolonging this. Like, it's not going to gain you anything at all. Like, you can try and... I mean, if you can use your crossbows to good effect at this point, I suppose it will, but I mean... I thought he was going to run all the way to the top of the hill then and just leave his troops cowering at the top. At least he's turning around and using the ammunition, and he is going to get some volleys off. So I take it back. I thought he was going to royally screw that up, but he didn't in the end. Those Orc Javelins are rousing. They could even end up winning this fight, to be honest with you, over here. With some crossbow support and the Dunedain captains, they could end up defeating what's left of the Nazgul, Ferodrim Javelins and Witch-Realm Enslavers. I mean, that is a deadly, deadly trio of attacking units. But they're all depleted. The Dunedain captains will need help from those crossbows if they are to secure victory. There goes the Mordor general, one of the Dunedain running him through. But you can see over here now, a lot of the attacking force. I mean, Rhun has still got a decent force left to them. Rhun and Angmar healthier than Mordor and Rhudaur, and they are now heading up this hill. Rhudaur swordsmen, Rhanadign Berserkers actually made it all the way up here, so they have been moving in. Doesn't look like they were able to actually utilise their ranged attack, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, they're strong in melee though. Like, they will lose to the Dalian Paladins, but they'll take their pound of flesh off them, and I don't think the defenders can afford the Dalian Paladins to take as much damage from the Rhanadign Berserkers unsupported as they will, which is why it's a good thing they're committing some Morroquendi bows to the equation to help out. Some of that elven skill will come in most handy, and of course both units will destroy Rhudaur swordsmen. But the Rhudaur swordsmen, a real workhorse for Rhudaur in this fight. They've been ever present for them up till now. There are the black shots. Still the trebuchet crew, still another unit of bows. I mean, they need to be prepared to... Like, this is the hill they now die on. If they lose this position with the Paladins and the Morroquendi that are already there, it's over. They can't afford to layer their defence at this point. It's already going to be a big ask, I think, for them to win this fight, the defenders, but we shall see. At this point, I think the Dunedain captains are ultimately succumbing to the... Well, I mean, it's going to be a very Pyrrhic victory for either side. Cardolan might even end up being victorious over here, but I think it's going to be rather irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. By the time those crossbows, if they do emerge victorious, get down there, like, their morale is going to be in pieces, as Cardolan morale often is in the late game in a fight where things are running pretty close. Oh, that's a shame. Blank fire, the Nazgul do close the gap. 2 Nazgul versus 35 Minhiriath sharpshooters. Make that 34 because the initial charge resulted in some death. It's going to be interesting, that. With some morale on infantry, 41 morale on infantry, that might be enough to secure victory for evil, honestly, there. There's still Temple Guard over there. Barrow Whites still slowly shambling their way around. What is going on over here? Have they committed more reinforcements in? I think at this point they probably should. Witch Realm Scourge Raiders chanting their war chants. You know, that's the second battle in a row where I've been close to the Witches and they've caused my game to crash, so maybe I should jump on the hate bandwagon for them. Although not from like a mechanical perspective, more from strain on the engine kind of sector. So we're going to have to sort of just keep that fight over there in mind for the time being. I mean, if we see a sort of orange flash in the distance, we can assume that they've managed to fire at point blank range, which I think is what they're trying to do, and that might be why it crashed, because they succeeded. And that, I mean, based on the amount of numbers that just fell there, I can assume that things have developed, and not necessarily in the defenders' favour. So it may be that the Witches were the final nail in the coffin. Now, I think the momentum was with the attackers anyway, so even if that was the case, I don't think it will affect the outcome of the battle too much. Maybe it will make a change from like a 3% differential to something closer to like a 9 or a 10. But you can also see over here that, technically speaking, the defenders have been successful over here. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. These two Nazgul will probably end up being finished off by a combination of the Dunedain captains and the Minhiriath sharpshooters at this point. Okay, let's take our lives into our hands here, and let's hope and pray that the Witches don't cause the game to vomit up its own guts again. Where are the Witches? Are they dead? They might be dead at this point, to be fair. I mean, by the looks of things, actually, they didn't manage to get their shot off. That is not the level of devastation I would expect from mighty Witches. And even if it... Well, I mean, they're there, they're there and they're trying to get a shot off. I see them. The cursed ones. We're still reduced to this, even after all this time. Cowering in fear whenever one of the game's big hitters sets up for a big shot because the game can't handle it and it coughs up blood whenever things like that happen. They're trying to get into position to fire. They're taking a lot of damage. I mean, for the love of God, Doge, use your Blackshot Dragon Slayers to finish them off so we can zoom in on that fight. I mean, actually, those Dalian Paladins are doing a good job. I think the thing is here, they are doing a good job, and ultimately the quality on the front line there is good for the defenders. Problem is, though, there's simply too much in the way of numbers from the attackers, and eventually they will be worn down. Also, I think, even though, I think the Nazgul may very well be... Nope, they're not. Once again, the Minhiriath sharpshooters tried to pull away from the fight to use their crossbows. This time, however, it has ended up costing MP back. I mean, he needed his units to stay on the front line. Then maybe, with the combination of their maces, the Dunedain captains and the Minhiriath sharpshooters could have made something happen on the front line fight there, but united you stand, divided you fall, and especially where Cardolan's morale is concerned, that's going to be the end of Cardolan's resistance over on this hill. So a very Pyrrhic victory for Rhudaur over here, as what's left of their Ferodrum javelins, enslavers, and the one Nazgul from Czech Norris's Mordor is going to be enough to win that fight. Meanwhile, let's head over to here, and we shall see if Doge has been successful in his finishing of the Witches, which he has not. And they are reloading. The Trebuchet crew is going in. Go back down there. I mean, there are still like the Barrow Whites which are shambling their way over, which is another problem. I mean, you can see over there crossbows, Scion Rim, mercenaries, like shadow bows. None of this is all that scary in melee, to be honest with you, to the point where Dragon Slayers, Hearthguard, like some of the strongest units left on the field, to be honest with you. The issue? Numbers. Defenders, I think, have just lost a little bit too much. Right, these Witches, I mean, at this point it's less of a case of needing to kill them off, and more a case of, what on earth is Jeb doing? I mean, at this point it might just be worth whacking them into fire at will just to see what they can do. I'm not taking a chance again, because it will tank my morale to go back into the game again if it crashes, because I got too close to them once again. One day I won't have to carry on about the crashing, but it is not that day. Temple Guard continuing to try and do their thing from way back over here. Those armor-piercing shots are going to have quite a good effect. Obviously the Trebuchet crew is getting destroyed on the front line because such is the level of quality of the troops that are remaining. Rhun are going to send forward some more of their stuff, like Animal Stroll Hunters in melee, Scion Rim, all of it are spears, so the Spear Malice going to be coming into effect. Let's see if we can get a little bit closer. Where are the Witches now? Are they dead? One can only hope. They're in there. This front line has been defeated again. Waiting a little bit too long to reinforce the lines is something that I think the defenders have done badly in this game. Like, it's a common miscalculation, I think, where they wait just far too long to reinforce the line to the point where it's honestly not even worth reinforcing the line. Like, when there's like 5 dudes left, like, you may as well just set up a new defence, to be honest with you. But I mean, this is the best position that they can take up now, so again, should have done it earlier perhaps. Blackshot Dragon Slayers, Hearthguard of Amon Sul, 2 strong units in melee, but it's ultimately not going to be sufficient for victory at this point. And again, yeah, 10% is going to be the difference in this fight, and I think that's about fair. It does classify as a close game, but only just. Only just. And I think the attackers did play well. I think, especially Rhudaur and Mordor, they forced their way through on this side of the battlefield with the triple bridges over here very well. And when they claimed the advantage, I liked how forward Dale was, but if you're going to commit to that, you need to commit a little bit more, I think. But the main problem the defenders had was panic, I think. When the dominoes started to fall, there was no stopping them. Like, this defence over here crumbled first, Rhudaur and Mordor started swamping in. This affected the defence as it was over on this hill, because then they seemed to take their eye off the ball over here, the defenders, and they just didn't organise themselves very well at all. By the time they sort of reorganised themselves and got some units moving in the right direction, the attackers were already swarming over the hill. The Alvalin Vanguard, you know, by the time they got there, were having to fight uphill into units that are pretty much a hard counter to them. The Hammer Guard were there as well, but they were not there. They're not going to have enough numbers to stop a fully fledged assault. Witch Raminquist has taken the hill. A symbolic victory, if nothing else. They can charge down the hill as well, I suppose. I'm still a little bit concerned about the Witches around here, because they might decide, you know what, we're going to fire at point blank and crash the game once again. And the Blackshot Dragon Slayers being forced up against the wall, as are the Hearthguard. Still a few more Aquendi bows here and there. A few Dalian Paladins. Bit of a mess at this point as the Scion Rim have pushed through the lines. And the Dragon Slayers won't go down too easily. Can say that about them. Balthros Tristan as well being used in the late game here. Good use for them. These strong crossbows are also here, as well as the Temple Guard. They might be out of ammo though. I mean, the crossbows can't really get into position. But you can see, not much left for the attackers either. There's still some goblin trackers, but I mean, they're garbage, like trash garbage in melee. So there's the Witch Realm Inquisitors, the Scion Rim, the Dunheim Shadow Bows. But you can see here the quality in melee is still allowing the defenders here to get some good kills here in the late game, and again, fine margins. It could have been a very different result here if the defenders had just kept their cool a little bit more in the transition between the fight for the outer reaches of this settlement here in this little caldera and the fight within it. The gap between the two was where the attackers, as they often do actually in most siege battles, was where they really nailed down their lead, and the defenders always struggled to come back from that, to be honest with you. But fair play to them for that. We got here Balthros Tristan. Out of ammunition. Actually, no, not out of ammunition. They've still got javelins. They're just trying to get into a position, presumably where they can fire their javelins into the back of those black shots. Or maybe they're just going to get into melee, add some more numbers to the front. They might just be getting in the way of stronger units, to be honest with you, though. And they are little more than more meat for the grinder when it comes to trying to fight Dragon Slayers in melee. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul, obviously, not as heavy on the damage dealing side of things. They were also in front of the Dragon Slayer, so they've taken the vast majority of the damage thus far. Well, quite. It's going to be an attacking victory here. Evil will be victorious, and I think a deserved victory as well, but an interesting one. We haven't seen Tal Falas work out in this way before. One of the things I always say about Tal Falas is that it can work out in multiple ways because of how multifaceted the map is. Very often though, well, I say very often, like more often than not, the first part of the battle works out as it did over on that hill. The defence over there, they don't go forward onto the bridges, they just sit in the valley, and then they all cower on top of that hill over there that we see. That's usually how it works out on Tal Falas, so for all of my saying that this map can work out in multiple ways, very often it doesn't. This time, however, it did. Dale, forward defence, the final stand over on this hill over here. The structure of the battle was also very different, so that's nice to see. Dragon Slayers refusing to go quietly into that good night. As they do. Pretty much the unit you'll see in any Dalian composition, really. because they're good in melee, they're strong in melee, damage dealing, which is something Dale do lack a bit of perhaps. But also the fact that they're very capable at range with those wind lancers and their black arrows means they're pretty much nailed on to be in any Dalian composition. Whenever we get round to the Dalian tier list, that kind of gives you an indication of where the Blackshot Dragon Slayers will end up on that, doesn't it? Temple Guard still firing away. 12 Rhudaur marksmen joining the fray. Not that much remaining now though, but as I said, good victory this, a good battle as well. Nice to see Tal Falas again. It's one of my old favourites in terms of maps for Reforged.
Our men have captured the it could have been we that was slain
And there we go.
on the field, but fate has been kind and delivered us victory.
Indeed. Tal Falas falls into Sauron's hands. And like I said, I think Rhudaur and Mordor, their assault was really the first step on their victory, because after that the defenders never really recovered themselves. Interesting to see the kill spread as well. Once again, Dorwinion with the lower amount of kills, and I don't feel as though that's... I mean, I don't think Joran could have organised his army a little bit better. He, after all, was the support, so it was technically down to him to sort of shore things up when things were looking a bit dodgy, and on both fronts that wasn't really the case, but that could be just a result of him spreading himself too thin. But also, Dorwinion's capabilities of dealing damage with their Elvelyn is lower, of course. No Nandor Glade Guard in there, which obviously a good damage dealing unit, albeit very fragile. And also, by the time he did send forward his more damaging units, like his Glade Masters and his Hammer Guard, he sent them into situations that were pretty hopeless. So they were never going to win that. But yeah, I think a deserved victory for the attackers for the reasons that I said before. I think they seized the initiative when they did, and from there on the defenders panicked and they just didn't let go of the momentum at that point. So let's see what did the damage for Rhudaur. Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters, decent performances. Troll Shirax throwers, again, good. Like, they were able to focus down good units, good targets for them as well. Lake Town Pikes and Morroquendi Pikes, definitely the sort of targets you want to go after, because they'll fall in droves to the high damage of axe throwers. Ferodrum Javelins did well as well. Obviously they were a big part in that very Pyrrhic victory against Cardolan on the other hill. Franadine Berserkers, they kind of got given the business in melee by the Dalian Paladins, but all 21 of those kills were on Dalian Paladins, I would suggest, so when you look at it through those lenses, it's not actually that bad. Rhudaur Swordsmen, the workhorse of the Rhudaur army, all of them getting relatively low kills, but all of them also putting in a lot of blood, sweat and tears into this Rhudaur victory, which Roman Slaver's doing well as well, and Clansmen performing much the same role as the Swordsmen. So yeah, a pretty good battle this indeed, so big thank you to the Emperor there for sending me in this battle replay, and a big thank you to all of the players for being a part of it as well. It was a very enjoyable one. Even the crash didn't sully it all that much. As for what's next, again, like I said, it's kind of... I've never been the most organised person, to be honest with you. I think that the spectre of that channel update video will be looming over for a little while yet. I think the most likely time for that to show up will be sometime in July, I would imagine, when things become a little bit more clear. As I said, I think everything is going to need some sort of reorganisation come September anyway. To what extent that reorganisation is still very much up in the air. The channel is not going anywhere, I should sort of point that out now. It's going to remain. But obviously sort of changes to the schedule is somewhat necessary depending on what actually happens. So yeah, that is something that does need to be addressed, but it's something I can't actually offer any sort of clarity on at the moment, because I don't know what's happening at the moment. I think the most likely thing is a more minor reorganisation in September, and then the more major one will probably be pushed back until early February of 2021. At least that's what it's looking like, although the more major reorganisation could still happen in September. Again, it's all very highly variable at this point in time, so I can't really offer any clarity, which is why I'm sort of waiting until July, when I will probably have a little bit more information on what exactly is going to be happening. As far as the content that's coming out soon, I do want to, again, I'm in one of those kind of semi-ruts again, where I kind of want to do other things, but it's one of those situations where the time spent doing other things is time not spent doing the content that I actually know works, and the content that people actually want to see. So it is a little bit awkward, but yeah, who knows? I mean, the next video that comes out is very likely to be another replay of some description. I still have a few that I can do, albeit the next one will probably be an unthemed battle. As I said, I'm still very much on the lookout for themed battles, because they're the ones that do better on the channel, without any real exceptions, to be honest with you. It's, again, I should hasten to say that it's not me not liking unthemed battles. I really don't mind as long as the battle itself is of high quality. But the numbers don't lie. Themed battles do significantly better than unthemed battles, which is why I'm always on the lookout for more, because, again, this is pretty much the last one I have in stock. So yeah, that's pretty much the situation as it stands at the moment. So yeah, big thank you to the Emperor once again and all the players. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.